Up. My name is Sean Winter from LumApps. I'm General Manager of North America. I have been in the space for a long time, although I'm joined by someone that I think has probably been in the space almost longer. So Billy, I'll let you introduce yourself quickly and then we can get started.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I've had the pleasure to work with Sean now at two companies. I'm a senior sales engineer here, based out of Portland, Oregon for LumApps. Been in LumApps for about 3 years, but it's my 17th year in the engagement and intranet space, formerly from Drive Software. So thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. And Billy, I know you're super passionate around social in the workplace, communities, communities of practice, communities of interest, asynchronous work, all of that. So I think we'll touch on that today because it's especially relevant given our topic for today. So Sydney, if you can jump to the next slide. We know there's been sort of shockwaves in the industry, I would say, over the past month or two with the news that Workplace by Meta, previously Workplace by Facebook, is end-of-lifing the product. So a lot of customers impacted, both with frontline employees and knowledge workers and everything in between. And so we'd love to sort of give you our perspective on some of these challenges that I think Workplace faced out in the industry and how we maybe think about them as a solution provider. So first and foremost, the notion of delivering enterprise software is not for everyone. This is not a sort of a knock at other vendors by any means, but I think Billy and I know whether we're supporting customers or prospects or helping out support or helping our product management team understand what customers need out of a solution, that there is a lot that goes into it, not just in terms of providing the product, but guiding adoption over time, ensuring that the customer is using it correctly, ensuring that they are seeing value out of it, and many, many more things. So we recognize that at LumApps, certainly that it's not as easy as, hey, let's just drop in a piece of software and everything will be fine. SaaS has certainly come a long way in terms of making that easier from a technical perspective, but we're still dealing with people, and people require lots of change management, lots of support, lots of adoption help and whatnot. So I think we'll spend some time talking about that today as well. Next slide, please, Sydney. So as I mentioned, Meta has decided to sunset Workplace, which then leaves an opportunity for lots of great companies to reconsider their communications and community strategies, right? And maybe you even want to move that conversation into mobile, into knowledge management, into search, into content management, and all sorts of other things that these types of platforms are great at. So when we think of what that means, right, and how we sort of think about LumApps as a solution provider to the most complex enterprises in the world, right? Number one is we take into account that there are many different personas at any given company. So not everyone is sitting or standing, in my case, at a desk. Lots of people are maybe working on site in a store, in a warehouse. People are traveling through airports. People are meeting with people all over the world. I think that obviously grew significantly during the pandemic. It's not slowing down. We know that things like remote and hybrid work are the new norm. And so we need to provide, when we're in this notion of a communication solution provider and community solution provider, we need to understand the different personas and how people like to work. The third bullet there is important as well, in that companies change over time. And as companies, whether it's adding employees, whether it's buying different companies with different ways of working or different culture, you need your technology solutions to grow with you. So it's very important that we don't just take what is traditionally a consumer-facing product and drop it in the enterprise, that we evolve that product over time to meet the unique needs of the enterprise. And then in the middle there, just the idea of customer success and support. Again, every product has issues. That's just the way of the world. And at LumApps, we invest heavily in both customer success and support to make sure that not only is your implementation a success at launch, but what happens day 2 and onwards. And that's something we're hugely passionate about here. Next slide, please. So we know that Workplace primarily was a community solution, and that's not a bad term to Billy and I. We come from a community background. We think it's fantastic. We also like to think that intranets can do more. Next slide, please. So yes, communities are 100% important. And if anyone tells you otherwise, I would say that's not the case. And I think it's even more evident today as companies are more distributed. as people are working in different tools. Billy may love to spend his day in Google Meet. I may love to spend my day in Slack. Someone else may love to spend their day in Loomapps or in Gmail or whatever they're comfortable in. We need technology now to be this elegant connector of ways of working across different people. And so if you think about that and what that is at its core, it's about how do we create a truly engaging employee experience across these different ways of working, across these different preferences of employees, right? And community is part of that. But these types of platforms, these intranet package solutions, as Gartner calls them, can do so much more. And so we would just like to take the time today to present to you what we think some of those ideas are. So please, as we're going through this, as you're potentially thinking about, what do we do now? Maybe our current provider is going away like a workplace, or maybe you just are in an open-minded place to review what's out there and see where the world is in terms of communications and intranet software. Some things that we think everyone should consider. Number one, that the solution is truly enterprise grade, right? Can it grow with me? Does it have the necessary security and compliance pieces? Does it have true customer success and support to ensure that my implementation will be a success over time? Number two, does the solution have a real content management system? Companies change every day. We talked about this earlier. Companies get more complicated. Everyone is moving towards a broadcast or an omni-channel type of model with different segments in their employee population that may or may not align neatly to the org chart. So do you have a real content management system that can scale to the unique needs of your company in a time where noise is at an all-time high for sure? And so it really, really matters that you're reaching people in the appropriate channels at the appropriate times. Scalable enterprise search, real quick, there's a lot happening in this place as search platforms become more of a connector platforms. So that's something we're hugely excited about as well. A solution with real integrations. Do you have a real partner ecosystem? We're super proud of our partnerships with the Workdays of the world and Google and Microsoft and SAP and so many more. That's something that matters because you've made a lot of investments into these types of technologies, and we want to be sure that we're adding value to those investments, not taking away. And then the AI piece. I know we all talk about that term, but we have a very, very specific viewpoint in terms of how employees can use AI to better find information and get work done. And don't forget all the stuff that's not product related, customer success, support, security. Those are things that we spend a lot of time on and are hugely passionate about. I would like to say we certainly have the best support and customer success teams in the world in this space, people that have been practitioners that have done this, both from a technical perspective and a user adoption perspective, and they are here to help. All right, so Billy, they've let me get through my slides, so now we can get interesting. So the first one, we know that Workplace and Facebook as a company definitely has a long history in mobile. Can you talk to us about how Loomapps views this space and why a mobile-first strategy is important for companies today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an expectation at this point, but there is a lot of frustration with mobile, depending on the type of application or depending on the type of situation where potentially there's multiple apps that you may need to be interacting with inside of an organization. And this is what Gartner refers to as app switching. Obviously, we're talking about mobile right now. And so there is the literal apps that you have, but also on a desktop experience, as we'll talk about, there's also this issue with app switching. And any given company could have upwards of 100 different applications. How does a user reduce the amount of places they need to go? But also when we think just about information, let's just take that little bit of information. So Sydney, if you go to the next slide, which is how I consume, how I search, how I get my news, my knowledge, my engagement with other users. And it's a real mix of kind of formal and informal, because when you think about a user's perspective, they don't care if the answer is in a knowledge base or if the answer is in a question that has been posted and answered in a discussion. That's all a solution to them. That's all their end goal. And we need to kind of serve that up to them. So one of the first things we need to do is make access super easy. So what we've noticed and early when I started in the space in 2007 at the time, This was a very novel idea of employees engaging, and it was very early adopters, mostly technology companies. There's not an industry today that hasn't rolled out something like this, whether it's healthcare, manufacturing, retail. And so with that, to Sean's point earlier, we have a large swath of different types of users. Some of them may not have access to your Google or Microsoft productivity suites. So we need to make access super easy. So let's make sure that users can come into the system using their own emails that have been provisioned, using QR codes, using SMS, right? Let's just make that process of getting on and staying on simple. And then to Sean's point with omnichannel, let's make sure that whether I'm a part-time mobile user, like Sean and I, who sometimes when we're away from our desk, or if I'm a full-time mobile user, is that notifications and navigation and search are at my fingertips. So if you need to push something to me and I don't have a corporate email, push it to my phone, push it to my mobile device. If you need me to see certain information, it's not going to be just about what am I following, what is my feed in that social media mentality, which we absolutely offer with personal feeds and engagement. But it's also, what do I need to see right now? What tasks do I need to complete? Or what onboarding journey am I currently a part of? What information has been highlighted for me because I'm a remote employee on the West Coast of the US that's a sales engineer. So these are the types of elements that can be catered and crafted where we're really blurring the lines, which is what the user expects, between formal top-down content and informal content. Now, if you go to the next slide, Sydney, this also is a really demanding time for brands. So Sean and I work with a lot of companies who have either totally different, distinct types of users or wholly owned subsidiary brands that operate independently, their own sites, their own teams, their own executives, their own users. So it's also important that there's a lot of flexibility. And we'll talk about desktop design in a minute, but the mobile design, it needs to reflect that too. So whether it's we have corporate workers that need to see kind of top-down policies and content when they first see the mobile device, but when my frontline user comes in, I need them to see maybe it's a retail worker. I need them to see store layout information and the new information about scheduling and day swapping, right, or whatever it might be. We can show these very uniquely, both from a custom branded app perspective, where it's your app and your intranet name, but also from an aesthetic around what type of content and feeds show to the user, where it's not always just the same kind of personal feed flowing in on the homepage.
Got it. So I think that makes sense. The different means of sort of access and delivering content through mobile, but also the branding power as well. Seems like something where we have a great story, and this looks fantastic. All right, moving on to the next one. So number 2, now that we've talked about delivering content via mobile, is this notion of really media-rich content, right? So not everything is the simple Facebook post that is words and maybe an image, and that's about it. But how do we think about media-rich content, Billy, and what can you share with us there?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to the next slide, Sydney, this really comes down to the type of things, again, that users expect from the types of sites we go to. So if I'm on social media, obviously things are short bursts. They are microblogs, which is a term we don't use anymore, but that's our status update type of mentality or tweet. But in the case of corporate content, that is just simply not mature enough in most cases, where I'm creating knowledge-based policies, corporate alerts, as some of our colleagues, in Austin have been going through some weather-related issues and outages, right? So whatever it might be that I need to get in front of someone, whether it is a short-term burst alert or a long-term piece of corporate memory and knowledge, and whether that content is written or recorded, such as a video or a podcast, and the blending of that, it's important that we have really rich templates so that process, even though the content is more robust and maybe long form, that it's still centralized in one place where I can have my social engagement and my formal content. But it's very easy for the authors to create and recreate this content over and over because the templates are stamped out, so that every time an internal job is posted, every time a piece of news is needed, every time a corporate alert is sent, that is always going to be consistent and very easy for the author to fill in the blanks and then post out in a syndicated way, which is, Sean, that's something we've heard a lot in companies, particularly anything over really 1,000 employees often,
right.
Sometimes smaller, but particularly when you get up to a certain size, is content can't live in one place. We hear this again and again. I need to create this content and I need to show it on the homepage. I need to show it on the onboarding page. I need to show it on these 3 team pages and these sub-brand sites. and I need to do it without any extra work on my part. I need to just click publish and go. So having the ability to stamp these templates out and then to make sure that they syndicate like all news sites, that's really important to our client base.
Makes sense. You get an element of consistency, but also some flexibility within that consistency to drive engagement.
Absolutely. And if we think outside of the box of where we go day to day, meaning like our social engagement, I'm planning a trip in the fall and I'm spending a lot of time on Quora and Reddit, TripAdvisor, right? I'm on a lot of these forum, sites, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which is not short burst. It's really about using and reusing knowledge over the long term, right? And that is going to be like travel blogs, which is I'm reading there's a lot of these long form content or videos, right? So that's user expectation is a lot more than just status updates.
Yeah. So we need a sort of a system where not everything just rolls off the page when it rolls off the page.
Yep, exactly. And then you can get back to it. And Sydney, if you go to the next slide, there's also the aspect of how do I need this to look? So when we think about theming, right, we need to be a system that is reflective of your brand, meaning you don't have to fit into our mold. We need to fit into yours, right? This needs to be your own kind of destination. And whatever you call it, it needs to reflect your values and the navigation you need. So a lot of times when people see theme, Sean, they'll think our custom font, darker light theme, a logo, right? And that is part of the process, right? What's the internet called?
This looks way beyond that, though.
Exactly. It's really about the user experience. So yes, we go through a process of the identity of what we're going to refer to as our employee engagement hub or employee engagement intranet. But it's so much more than that, which is, what are you focusing on as a company? What is your culture? And how do you want users to flow through the system? So that could be how we want them to navigate, how we want our pages to focus on maybe more social or more formal content. Or maybe we want to celebrate people and have rewards and recognition as a central focal point. It's really going to be up to each client of how they desire this to look. And some of our clients, like a large manufacturing airline company, right, they focus on this idea of a dashboard and integration with all their third-party tool sets, where we have a well-known retail brand who wants a very editorial magazine look. Both of those are correct for those companies, but the system that you're using needs to be flexible enough to accommodate that.
Got it. Makes sense. So it seems like these first 2 points around mobile and media-rich messaging are more kind of top-down in nature.
Yes.
I know a big part of these platforms is also employees sharing with each other.
Yep.
So what is our viewpoint at LoomApps around company information sharing?
So if you go to the next slide, Sydney, I think we're getting into that information sharing, and then click one more. So this is really where, and you hit on the nail on the head earlier, Sean, where we get into what we call communities of interest or communities of practice, right? So I've spent a lot of time working with extranets as well, so external customer communities, and we have our own. And this is really about a better capture of tacit knowledge, right? So what is in people's heads, and how do we make sure that we are promoting a culture of engagement, if you wish to promote that, and if you're on this webinar, you probably do, but the idea of how do we actually extend what we're already trying to do. So a community of interest could be something such as one of your corporate initiatives around D&I or sustainability, something that's formal, maybe your company events or kickoffs. It could also be something like a pet corner or a water cooler type space, right? Where ask leadership, mentorship, something that is more open, but with a focus, right? It's not just talk here. It is really intended to elicit a particular type of question, idea, or discussion. And then community of practice is going to be what it sounds like, a very practical community. A very common one, particularly during the pandemic, was a help desk. Classically, that's for IT, but that could be for sales, that could be for HR, that could also be for lines of business, competitive spaces, things like that, where we're trying to get to solutions quickly and tap into, again, that larger corporate knowledge, whether it's someone that's just started at the company but has experience, or someone that's been here 20, 30, 40 years. And we want to, again, capture that in a reusable way. So I know, I'm not speaking for Sean, but I know he agrees that this idea of what resides in people's heads is extremely powerful, and we don't want to lose that. And what we see often is that a lot of social tools tend to be very noisy, whereas when we can create these topic-based communities that are capturing and reusing in discussion format questions and answers and lively conversations. We're seeing a lot of value because these become more searchable, easy to get back to, and easy to feature alongside formal content, right? So I don't know, Sean, would you agree that an answered question in a discussion is, in a way, knowledge base in and of itself?
100%. And I think this is why some people mistakenly think that you can accomplish these use cases very simply in a chat tool like Slack or Teams. But I think number one is this notion of reusable content. Somebody answered a question correct. That is the source of record going forward, and that needs to be findable, which would be impossible in a chat tool. But also, I think the example you gave before of maybe someone that's been at the company 30 years and someone that's brand new, like they would never know to talk to each other in a chat tool. Because number one, not only do you have to be online at the same time, but you have to actually know the person who has the answer to the question, which in most cases, we've all worked at many companies for many years. The whole point of having a question is that you don't know the person who has the answer to the question. So well, I think this makes sense.
There's also that intimidation factor too, that, you know, when we think about the psychology, when I started at LoomApps 3 years ago, I wouldn't think on day one that I would go and Slack our CEO. But when I posted a discussion inside of one of our team communities, our CEO was one of the first people to respond. So that is, you know, again, opening up this dialogue that may not have happened, which is a great point, Sean.
Right. Well, excellent.
Yeah.
So you opened my eyes to the possibilities. There's so much more that these platforms can do that sort of sit within the realm of community, but can stretch it in a way that's way more engaging, way more mobile friendly, way more on brand, way more specific to the persona of the employee and their chosen ways of working.
Absolutely. So Sydney,
next
if you go
slide,
to the
please, Sid.
Oh yes, of course.
Migrations. So I know if I'm on a platform that's being end of life, this probably is keeping me up at night. This concept of migration. I have all this old content. I need a process to understand maybe what of it is worth keeping and what isn't. I need a process to understand how does this map and potentially arrive at a new solution. I know that at LoomApps we have done a lot of these. Would that be a fair assessment, Billy?
Oh yes.
And Sydney, if you can go to the next slide, you'll see here some of the largest brands in the world where we've done migrations. Not only do we have a best-in-class, unique, proprietary migration engine in-house here, right? So this is not a manual effort by any means. There are certainly manual steps. This is a human-driven process, but we have an engine in-house that we've used over 50 times in the last 6 years with some of the most complicated companies out there in the world. You'll see here, we have multiple different export options for your existing content. We've migrated over 1 million pieces of content just through last year. So a substantial effort for sure. And this isn't easy. Don't take this light. I think a lot of companies will tell you, yeah, we do migrations. But understand that when you're coming from a platform that is so simple, like a workplace, and has so few content types, to something more robust with more options, it's important to really get this right and ensure that your employees not only have the best chance in the new system of finding the content they need, but they can evolve their use cases over time to do all of this other great new stuff that we talked about today. Would that be a fair statement, Billy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also twofold. One thing to point out that we didn't cover yet is for all of the organizations I've talked to that are using something like Meta or something similar, is they often have it side by side with something else called the intranet. And there's often two places to go, one for information and one to be social, which again, that really goes against the user's expectation that I will have truly a hub that connects with those systems. I will have less places to go, but more importantly, whether I'm consuming knowledge or asking a question or maybe doing both at the same time, those really should be one and the same. So a lot of times, to Sean's point of migration, we're often migrating from something like a social tool like Meta or many others that have come and gone over the years, and they are not the first, and probably some kind of knowledge resource to finally have a central touch point where users start their day.
Makes sense to me. Well, Billy, thank you for your time.
You as well, Sean. Thank you.
Sydney,
thank you guys so much. I wanted to pop in because we did have a question in the chat. I don't know if it popped up on your side, but I'm able to see it over here on my screen. But Ezra asked what mechanisms should be put in place to iterate and refine the digital workplace strategy over time. in order to adapt evolving business needs and trends. So kind of a big question, but just a brief overview if you guys have a few thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, you've run these types of things. I'll let you start. You've actually been in the position that he's been in, and then I can fill in.
I'll tell you, there's a yeah. Thanks, Billy. There is if you have a relationship with Gartner, they have a wonderful methodology for this. They call it DEX, or Digital Employee Experience, and it's a way to sort of evaluate where your company is today on 5 different attributes, and then it actually builds out different steps that you can do over time to get to the next level. So think of it like a digital maturity chart that gets you from today, which doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing, Ezra, by any means, but it helps you understand what are your different personas, what are the different needs from different parts of the business, what are the different change management considerations, and how to actually then implement technology that people use to get you to that next step. So I would recommend, if you have a relationship with them, to certainly ask about the DEX maturity model. I'm sure you could search for it on the internet as well, but that's something that I go back to, just because it's what you're talking about is a big, scary, hairy kind of thing. And I think when you can start to say, okay, these are the key elements and attributes that I need to focus on to get from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, it starts to make sense, and you can actually make demonstrable progress in a short amount of time.
And, from a tech standpoint, to piggyback off of that, I love that point, Sean. The analysts are such a great resource, but make sure that the technology you're investing in is something where that you have running room, right? That you will not immediately hit a ceiling, because we've talked to a lot of organizations that started with something very simple because, hey, everybody knows how to use, let's say, Facebook. It's really, really easy. And then as soon as additional use cases outside of social come into place, you hit a ceiling really quickly. And as soon as think about it this way, right? Our social lives, it's okay if we miss things. It's okay if I don't see a post on Facebook, but work, it's much more detrimental to my day-to-day or my productivity. And work is just inherently more complex. So whether it's, planning to say, I need to get up to 60 miles an hour, so I can't use a bike, I'm going to need a car, to use a random analogy. Make sure that the tech you have is a crawl, walk, run. Even if you're starting simple, make sure that you have room to grow, that if this department wants to participate, if we need to do these use cases, I'm going to be able to tackle that with the technology I'm buying and not have to do another migration and another purchase and another RFP. Even if you don't do all of that on day one, right? What's phase 2, what's phase 3, what's phase 4? And that's where more of an enterprise grade solution is going to be more beneficial to you.
Sounds good to me. Sydney,
Awesome.
how'd we do?
Oh, amazing. Really explained it well. Thank you so much, Billy and Sean, for being here. And thank you everyone for attending. I know we went over a little bit on the time there. So thank you if you stuck around, and just hang tight. I will send out those lunch vouchers here within the next hour. Just got to do a little bit of admin on my side, but they will be over shortly. So thank you all for being here, and have a great rest of y'all's day.
Thanks, Sydney. Thanks, Billy.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Sydney. Bye.
Yeah.